No! Continuous scrap! There is no toilet paper here!
Have you ever stopped to think about what you would do if you walked into your bathroom right now and the toilet paper roll was just an empty cardboard tube staring back at you? Panic, right? We have all been there. Now imagine that panic, but for your entire life, for your entire civilization, for thousands of years. Because for the vast majority of human history, the soft, white, perforated rolls we take for granted simply did not exist. And then when we zoom in on one of the most advanced, most sophisticated civilizations the world has ever seen, ancient China, the question becomes even more fascinating. How did the people who built the Great Wall, who invented gunpowder and the compass, who wrote poetry that still makes the heart ache, how did they handle one of the most basic, most universal, and let us be honest, most awkward human needs? What did they use before toilet paper? This is not just a story about hygiene. This is a story about class, about technology, about what we consider clean and dirty, and about a relationship with the body that is profoundly different from our own. So, let us open the door to the ancient Chinese bathroom, or more accurately, the ancient Chinese privy, and take a journey from the silken wipes of emperors to the simple splash of water used by a farmer in a rice paddy. Welcome to the utterly fascinating, sometimes shocking, and deeply human history of how people in ancient China cleaned themselves. Let us begin with the greatest irony of all. The civilization we are talking about, China, is the very civilization that invented paper. We all know the story, or at least the legend. It is the year 105 during the Eastern Han Dynasty, and a eunuch court official named Kai Lun presents his new invention to the emperor. He has taken mulberry bark, old fishing nets, hemp wastes, and rag, pounded them into a pulp, and dried the mixture into thin, flat sheets. This is the birth of paper, a material that will revolutionize the world, carrying knowledge, art, and administration across continents. So, logically, you might think, oh, so from 105 onwards, the Chinese were using paper for everything, including wiping. Right? Absolutely, completely, and emphatically wrong. This is the paper paradox. For more than 1,000 years, after Kai Lun's groundbreaking invention, the idea of wiping one's backside with paper was considered, by the vast majority of people, to be a profound and unthinkable sacrilege. To understand why, you have to understand that in ancient China, the written word was sacred. Paper was the physical vessel of knowledge, poetry, Confucian classics, imperial edicts. To take something with characters written on it and use it to clean human waste was not just unhygienic, it was a deep offense against heaven, your ancestors, and the entire scholarly tradition. There were even official decrees and established customs. The scholar Yan Shitui during the Northern Qi Dynasty wrote explicitly in his family instructions, "Among the paper I have, that which is quotes from the classics or commentaries on them, I would never use for toilet purposes." This was not a mere suggestion. This was a moral and cultural law. Imagine a world where throwing a book in the trash today was seen as a spiritually dangerous act. That was the status of paper in ancient China for centuries. It was high-class, it was revered, and it was absolutely not for your bottom. So if not paper, then what? To answer that, we need to step out of the luxurious palace and into the fields, the forests, and the simple homes of the common people, because their solution was the most ancient and most widespread of all. The hand of nature. Before there were tools, there was the environment. And for the common person in ancient China, from the earliest Neolithic villages to the peasant farmers of the Ming Dynasty, the toilet was often just a crude pit over a pigsty, or a simple hole in the ground, and the wiping method was whatever the immediate surroundings provided. The go-to tool for millennia was a simple, sturdy stick. Yes, a stick, often bamboo, which was plentiful, or a smooth, flat piece of wood. The technical term you might see in historical and archaeological literature, and I promise you this is a real word, is a shit stick, or in Chinese, si chu, which literally translates to toilet stick. A smooth, spatula-like piece of bamboo or wood. It was not exactly the soft, quilted comfort we dream of, but it was functional, reusable in some cases after a rinse, and completely biodegradable. But the common person's arsenal was far more varied than just a stick. It depended on the season and the geography. Smooth, oval stones collected from a riverbed were a common choice, and if you think about it, they were naturally cool and non-porous, making them a fairly clean option with a bit of water. In the autumn, a fistful of dry, crinkly leaves did the job. In the fields, a bundle of soft straw or hay was readily available and had the benefit of being slightly absorbent and scrubbed. Some would even use a broken piece of pottery, a shard of ceramic, carefully chosen to avoid sharp edges, a handy bit of recycling from a broken household pot, seashells in coastal regions, corn cobs after the kernels were eaten, and even a bit of frayed rope from old fishing nets. This was a direct, resourceful, and completely unglamorous relationship with the natural world. There was no privacy in our modern sense. It was just a daily fact of life, as normal as eating or sleeping. And the cleanup was minimal. Everything was organic, returning to the earth in the dung heap with a pigsty. But what about in the cities, where leaves and smooth stones were not so easily plucked from the ground? What about the merchant class, the artisans, the shopkeepers? This is where we see the first forms of what you might call ancient tissue, but not as you know it. Linen, hemp, and old rags came into play. A worn-out set of hemp trousers or an old linen tunic did not get thrown away. In a world where textile production was incredibly labor-intensive, every scrap of fabric had value to the very end of its life. The end of that life was often in the latrine. Old rags would be cut into smaller, reusable wiping cloths. They would be used, then tossed into a dedicated pot of water, vinegar, or lye soap, then washed and used again. This was the sustainable, circular economy thousands of years before it became a modern buzzword. Hemp was particularly common and interesting. Hemp fibers, when processed, have a naturally coarse, slightly abrasive texture. It was not soft, but it was effective. And the plant has mild antimicrobial property, which may have offered a tiny, accidental hygienic benefit. So, the urban commoner had to step up from a stick, moving towards a reusable cloth system that foreshadowed the modern bidet and towel philosophy. In all of this, from the stick to the rack, already shows us a deep class divide that runs through the entire history of wiping. For the farmer, it was a stick. For the merchant, it was a rack. So what, then, was the pinnacle of luxury? What was the highest, most absurdly opulent wiping material known to the ancient world? The answer lies behind the high walls of the imperial palace. Let us step into the Forbidden City, not as it is today, a museum thronged with tourists, but as it was during the Han or Tang Dynasty, the center of the known world. The emperor, the son of heaven, was a semi-divine being. His body was sacred. Every act, from eating to sleeping to defecating, was a ritualized performance of cosmic importance. The idea that the emperor would wipe himself with a peasant's stick or a soiled rag is, of course, unthinkable. He had an entire department of servants and a dedicated treasury for his most private moments. And what did they use? Silk. Cloth. Pure, incredibly expensive silk fabric, cut into small, disposable squares. Let that sink in. The material that traveled along the Silk Road, worth more than its weight in gold, that only the highest nobility in Europe could dream of wearing as a full garment, was used by the Emperor of China for a single, fleeting, and inglorious purpose before being discarded. It is a display of power and wealth so absolute that it defies comprehension. Recent archaeological evidence has even shown this was not just a luxury, it was a formalized state practice. In 1992, during the excavation of the Ming Dynasty tombs, a site famous for its perfectly preserved mummy of Lady Di, archaeologists found an incredible artifact in her funerary goods, and you can even see traces of fecal residue on some of the scraps. This was a noblewoman, not even an emperor, and her tomb was equipped for the afterlife with the ultimate in hygiene. The silk was not perfumed in the way we might think, but it was soft, pure, and worthy of a body that was destined for immortality. The court eunuchs who managed the emperor's daily life would have been responsible for stocking the privy with these silk squares, probably scented with the smoke of rare incense or kept in boxes of aromatic sandalwood to show that even the act itself was wrapped in a cloud of precious fragrance. This is the ultimate expression of a simple historical truth. The story of toilet paper is a story of class. Between the silk of the emperor and the stick of the farmer, there was a vast gulf, and that gulf was filled with 1,000 years of cultural evolution that was about to take a surprising turn. Because eventually, and despite all the sacred taboos, paper did win. The shift was agonizingly slow, beginning perhaps as early as the 6th century but not becoming truly widespread until the 14th century. It happened purely for reasons of practical efficiency. The first recorded mention of toilet paper in human history, a fact that is both astonishing and strangely momentous, comes from the scholar official Yan Jitui, the same man who warned against using classic texts. In a very same passage from the 6th century, he goes on to say, "For paper with quotes from classics and commentary, I dare not use for toilet purposes. For other paper, it is fine. There it is, the crack in the dam. Non-sacred, scrap paper, paper with tychos, old correspondence that did not quote the sages, was now fair game." It was the birth of the concept of waste paper, a recycling of knowledge into a tool of pure utility. The logic was irrefutable. Paper was lighter than rags, more absorbent than a stick, and softer than a shard of pottery. It was an evolution of comfort, not necessarily of hygiene, but of sheer sensory experience. By the time of the Ming Dynasty, roughly 960 to 1279 AD, China was a bustling commercial empire with paper money and a huge demand for paper of all kinds. Old banknotes, used ledger sheets, discarded poetry. If it was not a holy text, it could have a second, very humble life. But the real revolution, the moment that truly marks the beginning of the toilet paper age, was the Ming Dynasty, specifically the year 1393. This is a landmark year for any student of toilet history because we have a surviving bureaucratic record from the imperial court. It is an annual procurement document for the palace in Nanjing. And in this document, the officials meticulously record the production of 720,000 sheets of toilet paper for the personal use of the Hongwu Emperor and his immediate family. 720,000 sheets, and that is not all. Another 15,000 sheets were made for the court concubines and servants. Each sheet was a standardized size, approximately 2 feet by 3 feet, which is enormous by our standards. This was not a roll you put on a holder. This was a large, perfumed, flat sheet of pure luxury paper. The process was described in detail. The Bureau of Imperial Supplies sourced the finest, softest rice straw pulp. The paper was not just any paper. It was a special, absorbent paper, and then it was perfumed with spices and sweet-smelling oils. The imperial toilet paper of the Ming Dynasty was a bespoke, handcrafted, aromatic product. It was a far cry from the two-ply we buy at the supermarket. It was a symbol of a society that had not only accepted paper as a wiping tool but had elevated it to an art form, an object of deliberate manufacture for a single, private use, a massive industrial process dedicated to the emperor's bomb. This process showed that the sacred taboo was completely broken. Utility had triumphed. And from the emperor's palace in Nanjing, the practice slowly, over centuries, filtered down to the general population, especially in urban centers where waste paper was a cheap commodity. But to understand ancient Chinese hygiene, we have to shatter a very modern and very Western assumption. We equate wiping with being clean, but in much of the ancient world, and in most of the world today outside of a few Western countries, wiping with dry paper is seen as fundamentally inadequate. It is a dirty job, a smearing, not a true cleaning. The ancient Chinese, in every class from emperor to peasant, understood this. The true cleaning agent was not the paper, the stick, the silk, or the rag. It was water. Water was, and remains, the undisputed king of global hygiene. Every single wiping method we have discussed was almost certainly accompanied by a thorough, multi-step water wash. The evidence for this is everywhere. In aristocratic circles, a servant would have been present with a special ewer, a long-spouted vessel, for pouring clean water, and a dedicated basin to catch it. The person would use their chosen tool, the silk or soft paper, to assist and then dry themselves, but the core cleaning action was a directed stream of water. It was a hands-on, but effective manual bidet system. For a common person, the method was simpler but functionally identical. A pot or a dipper of water would be poured with the right hand, using the left hand to do the direct cleaning. This is a crucial cultural point, and it explains a facet of etiquette that persists in many parts of Asia, the Middle East, and Africa to this day. The left hand is considered unclean. You do not eat with your left hand. You do not hand an object to someone with your left hand. You do not gesture with your left hand. This is a direct, unbroken lineage from the pre-toilet paper water washing method. The left hand was the cleaning hand, washed thoroughly with water afterwards. Of course, but ritually designated for an impure task. The right hand was kept pristine for social interaction and eating. To use your left hand to greet someone was to offer them the symbolic equivalent of a soiled rag. So, the combination was always there. The dry material, a stick, a rag, a piece of paper, was for the initial, gross removal of solid waste. It was a pre-wipe. The water wash was the true, final act of cleaning. This brings us to a related question. What did ancient toilets actually look like? They were not serene bathrooms. That typical urban latrine was a deep pit, a cesspool, often connected directly to the family pigsty. The toilet was literally positioned above the pit enclosure. This is a form of integrated farming that was brilliantly efficient and deeply logical. Human waste feeds the pigs fatten up. The pig manure, along with the human waste, creates a rich compost that fertilizes the fields. It is a closed-loop, zero-waste agricultural system that sustained Chinese civilization for millennia. For you, the user, it was a simple wooden or stone bench with a slot, and you would sit or squat over the opening, knowing that the grunting, snuffling sounds below you were your family's future dinner finishing off what you had just deposited. The smell would have been overpowering, the flies ever present, but the public health logic was sound. The waste was contained in a concentrated area, away from drinking water sources, and was transformed into valuable fertilizer instead of polluting the streets. The night soil man was a key figure in this urban ecology. Every morning, a collector with his cart and sealed buckets would come to the latrines, both private and public, and collect the night soil. He would then transport it out of the city to the surrounding farms, selling it as the most potent fertilizer available. This was a huge industry. The night soil trade was a regulated, competitive, an essential part of the ancient Chinese economy. Your waste was a commodity you sold. But what about public health? With so much contact between bodies and waste, from the night soil man's hands to the farmer's feet, what did they know about hygiene beyond water? The ancient Chinese developed a sophisticated pharmacopoeia of cleansing agents. This was not soap in the modern sense, but botanical solutions for cleaning hands and body after the toilet. Water infused with wild ginger or artificial leaves was common, as these plants were known for their purifying, insect-repelling, and medicinal properties. Aromatic woods like sandalwood and camphor were not only for their scent but were believed to dispel miasma, the foul air that caused disease. After cleaning, especially for those who could afford it, the body was not just left bare. Scented powders made from ground rice, mung beans, were mixed with crushed flower petals, and herbs were used as a dry finishing layer on the skin to absorb residual moisture, soothe irritation, and provide a perfume barrier against the next onslaught of bodily functions. This was a full sensory management system. The goal was not just the absence of dirt, but the presence of a pleasant, dry, and fragrant state of being. Finally, we must ask about the most personal and delicate aspect of all. What did women use during menstruation in ancient China? This is a part of history so often silenced. The principle was the same as for wiping, a reusable cloth pad system. Women would take soft, absorbent, worn cotton or hemp rags and fold them into a long, thick strip. They would be tied around the waist with a belt or string, a loincloth of sorts, creating a washable sanitary napkin, known colloquially in later eras as a monthly cloth. After use, they faced the deeply private labor of washing these cloths, a task done in seclusion, often at a specific well or part of a stream, with cold water and the same purifying herbs, then dried away from the male gaze, often under the bed or in a dark corner of the house, as the sight of a menstrual cloth was considered deeply polluting and taboo. For the very wealthy, there was a disposable option. The same soft, absorbent paper that was developed for the emperor's toilet was also used by elite women, wadded into a makeshift absorbent pad inside their cloth holder and then discarded. The Ming Dynasty procurement records even suggest a special supply of the softest paper was set aside for the women of the inner court, showing that the technology of the toilet was not blind to the specific needs of the female body. So, where does this leave us? The question of what ancient Chinese people used before toilet paper unlocks the universe. It is a history of profound class divides. From the shimmering, perfumed silk of the Son of Heaven, through the soft, bespoke paper squares of the main core, the reusable hemp rags of the city merchant, and down to the simple, honest, biodegradable stick of a rice farmer. It is a history of a total recycling economy where a broken pot, an old fishing net, or a worn-out tunic had a complete life cycle. It is a history of a deep cultural logic where the left hand is unclean and the written word is too sacred to be soiled. And most importantly, it is a history of a water-based, hand-assisted cleaning system that for thousands of years had been the global standard, in which millions of people who use water instead of paper today are the direct inheritors of. The roll of paper next to your toilet is a blip on the historical radar. It is a dry, modern, and frankly, incomplete solution to an ancient problem. The next time you reach for that roll, you are holding the commodity descendant of the emperor's silk in the scrap paper of a Song Dynasty poet. The history of civilization is not just written in our grand monuments, but also in the small, private acts we do every day. So, I have a question for you. After hearing all this, if you had the choice, would you rather use the emperor's silk, a gardenia leaf and a splash of water, with a trusty stick? Let me know in the comments. I will be reading them with my clean, right hand. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.